Amazing. So I'm going to pass over to Nina, our creative producer on the events following the anthology, to tell us a bit more about the anthology and to tell us a bit more about the satellite events.
Thank you, Hannah. And hi, everybody. Really excited to have you all join, and thanks for tuning in on this weekend. Um, to offer some context, with Anthology, I know some of us have our copies, some are still waiting. They're still available on our site, so please go and see. Um, the context of Anthology is it's a collection of archive stories and new commissions that support, that explores time, cycles, rhythm, pacing, and change. Maybe this is something that resonates with you. It marks 10 years of Skindeep's work at the intersection of culture and racial justice, but it also looks far beyond the past decade and far beyond Skindeep to the long histories and broad ecologies we're proud to be part of. Over 50 artists, writers, editors, and designers contributed directly to Anthology, but it exists thanks to the efforts of so many more, known and unknown, and it continues to grow and evolve through the people that interact with it, including you all today. So thanks so much for being with us, and thank you for keeping the archive alive and for lifting these stories off the page. Um, the way that we're rolling out this program as well of the spring and summer, the aim is really to take time to sit with the fantastic work that has been poured into all of the elements of Anthology and really deepen our engagement with the pieces over an extended period. It's not oftentimes we get to really sit and process and explore a piece of work, and we would really appreciate if you can do that today. Um, the idea for each of these events is to take a work or take an article from Anthology as a starting point and to invite our collaborators, today Amrit and Sylvia, to expand on the work and to draw on new interpretations. And each event is then grounded in this reading. So we'll share all of that together, and then we'll hear more from Amrit and Sylvia on the visual identity. So thanks so much for being here. I'm going to pass it back over to Hannah. And we're here again. If there's any tech issues, please shout us, myself and Hannah. Back to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you. Yeah, so just before we get going, just to introduce the two people who'll be doing much of the speaking today. Amrit Randhawa is a graphic designer, artist, lecturer, writer, and occasional DJ. He is the designer behind the Manchester-based studio Taxicab Industries and is currently studying typology at the University of Reading, where his research explores the use of typography within British Asian cultural outputs. He writes in the third person to convey a sense of professionalism, and there is much more of that humor that you find in his bio to come, I'm sure, in the next 2 hours. And Sylvia Hong is a creative strategist, consultant, and filmmaker born in Paris. She has previously worked at publications such as British Vogue, Dazed, and ID, developing online content with an editorial expertise focusing on youth culture. Co-creative director and a founding member at Skin Deep, Sylvia has contributed in developing the organization's visual identity towards an anti-imperialist cultural production, always ensuring that radical media remains accessible and the revolution stays sexy. So thank you so much, you two, for being up for this conversation. I am super excited, and I'm sure everyone else is. So yeah, just to get us grounded and started, Amrit, please would you do us the honor of reading your design note from the anthology?
Yeah, of course, Anna. Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I was asked to write a design note, which is called Entirely Unsure. So I'm going to be doing a reading of it in full now. So Entirely Unsure, a note on design. To me, typography is entirely optical. Kerning does not follow a scientific logic. It is all based on gut feelings, Mirajan. And so is this design note, so please bear with me. It is an enormous pleasure to have been hired for my curiosity in typography. I think we live in a golden age of typography. It's not perfect by any means, but we have people, notably a great deal of young people, making cases for a multitude of scripts to exist, and as a result, a multitude of voices can be heard. My rationale for focusing on typography at a time when it's been liberated and made so widely accessible is that its history tells us fascinating things about the world. Behind every political message is a human mark that has created that letter form, from placards at protests to the cover of magazines. Most people give very little consideration to where letters come from. They simply appear on pages of screens. Sorry, they simply appear on pages or screens as if they have existed since the dawn of time itself. But all letters were made, and their shapes contain the story of that making, if you know where to look. Typography is often determined by what materials existed in different parts of the world. The physical matter that makes up our environment has a bearing on how information and ideas are communicated. Serifs, the little flicks on a font like Times New Roman, comes from the shape of the blade the Romans used to carve into stone, while the veins of palm trees or palm leaves dictate how Southern Indian scripts form their big sort of swirly details. In choosing fonts for this anthology, I wanted not only to serve the reader and for the meaning and tone of the text to be wholly considered, but also to reflect on how the font has been used throughout history. Each archive piece is labelled with the information on its provenance, for which I use 3 separate fonts. I use English Egyptian, arguably one of the first ever sans serif fonts, for the text from the archive. The original issue number next to it is set in Futura, which was drawn between 1924 and 1926 by Paul Renner, who was arrested by the Nazis for writing a cultural essay critical of their ideology. It's important to remember here the people who draw typefaces have political views, and this is a consideration I make when choosing a typeface. Futura is not Futura is also the only font which is on the moon after a plaque was left there in 1969. Finally, I use avant-garde for the date that the archive piece was originally published in. Drawn in the 1960s in New York for the subversive magazine of the same name, avant-garde is the font used on Gil Scott-Heron's 1974 compilation album, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, in a kerning style informally known as TNT, tight, not touching. I use it next to Futura because of the Gil Scott-Heron track Whitey on the Moon, which is featured on the compilation album. The song criticized the amount of money being spent on the space race while millions of African Americans experience poverty and hardship. Paul Renner and Gil Scott-Heron's messages feel aligned. The state isn't great, and both were uncompromising to sort of explain that. There are around 50 fonts in this publication. That's of time of writing. I haven't counted since, but I suspect it's more than 85. And not enough time for me to explain them all here. But each choice has been considered. A font used for the title page of Joshua Idahen's piece, Interview with an Ancestor, set in Benin City, is based on a contemporary redrawing of the font from the plaque of a plaque from the British Museum made to display the Benin bronzes, looted by the British in 1879. For Slow Violence on Trial, written by Misha Fraser Carroll, and illustrated by Dion, I chose a font based on an original by Carl Gerstner, which he created as a part of a new brand identity pitched to the oil giant Shell in 1964. The pitch was rejected, and the typeface was shelved until the designer Lawrence Brunner found it on an apprenticeship at Gerstner's film and design studio 50 years later, where he decided to redraw it. My role on this anthology has been to reflect on the last 10 years and how to represent it with Skin Deep is entirely DIY project, something people might not know from the outside because it looks quite polished. And we all still associate DIY visually with things like Sharpies, glue sticks, photocopiers, but similarly to how a lot of us feel as if the 1980s were 20 years ago, that image is a lie. the DIY scene hasn't looked like that in decades, thanks to personal computers. So one of the things I wanted to borrow was one of the things I wanted to do was to borrow some anachronistic visual language of the DIY visual culture from before we were the time we were before we were born in, sorry, in order to capture and communicate the spirit, the DIY spirit of Skin Deep. The time capsule pages were designed to provide moments for the reader to pause and to break up the density of the publication that is heavy with text and ideas. They also speak to the ideas of other options, other ways of doing things, other worlds, and other systems. They are not quite like dream spaces, but maybe they are like Arundhati Roy's portals. The negative space leaves room for what's not here yet, what can still happen. Breathability felt important from the start, but our designs came up against the immovable object of the budget. Um, Unable to afford too much blank space, we nonetheless found ways of creating pockets of breathable room, gestures to spaciousness, as in archiving. Sometimes what is absent says more than what is present. That is an object that will outlive us all. Sorry, this is an object that will outlive us all, we hope. Um, we have given thought to the paper quality and ink type so that the magazine itself, not just the stories and the ideas within it, age as well. Typography exists as a vessel to serve language, and my job as a designer is also one of service. I'm here to translate ideas with historical nuance and always with respect to letters and language. It's also important to note of my approach to design that I embrace the state of being entirely unsure. This is not self-deprecation, but an intentional leaving of space for curiosity. Reflecting on the theme of time, I have two last things here to say. Um, there is no perfect time to make work. Everything will always be against you. I believe in the art school way of creating, which is often and always. Um, thank you.
Thank you, Amrit. Have a sip of water because I know you don't drink too much. There you go. Keeping him hydrated. Thanks, everyone. And thank you for reading this. There's a lot in this design note. I think a lot of great historical anecdotes, a lot of great references. I love that you used even fonts. When you mention a font, you see the font visually, and there obviously has been a lot of thought and intentionality behind everything that you do and that you did in the anthology. And I really just wanted to know the general inspiration for this that you didn't manage to put in the design note. And like take us through your decisions. I don't want you to talk about the 85 fonts, but give us like 5 to 10 at least. Maybe not 5 to 10, but like your top favorite that you didn't manage to put in here that you really wanted a place in the design note but didn't, and you're still thinking about it to this day.
It's a really good question, and it's like asking me to choose my favorite child out of the 85 fonts. What I will say is the consideration is it's fun for me. It's like it's not a chore. It feels like a sort of a sense of like civic duty to give the time and respect to for me if I've known somebody's drawn a typeface for maybe like 2 or 3 years of their life, maybe a typeface we've used on the project might have been drawn 200 years ago, knowing the process that it was once set in metal, it was maybe drawn to be at 9 point for a newspaper or something, and over time maybe it got made into letraset or photo typesetting, and at some point it would have been digitized for a screen, and since the personal computer just got much better, that font might have been drawn, several times in that process. So it's kind of knowing which version of that font we're potentially going to use, which one feels true. I think I could have talked a lot more about I guess the for me there's a moment where like fonts like this which were just always drawn for computers, um, fonts that look very in a way 1980s. Um, I could have spoken a bit more about that moment where there's a technological change, and as a result, all typography changes. Something I was was aware of last year was like at some point in the 90s or 2000s, Greece, well, like the European Union decided that because of how goods and services are traded through the sort of economic bloc, that you should have all the language systems on there. So then you have an abundance of Greek typographers starting to have their work printed onto every fridge manufactured in Europe. And it became interesting that what was quite a redundant or unknown outside of Greece, sort of, or Greek speaking kind of places, has to come to the forefront. And I'm really interested with this issue of that DIY language, that idea that I'd been brought on for issue 11, the anthology, but there's 10 years before that precedes me of also uses of like Futura, and I probably could have spoken. The thing that keeps me up at night, Sylvia, is I wish I spoke more between that relationship between all your decision making previously, and how I could how my job was to sort of build on those foundations.
I think that would have been great because it gave, for me personally, it would have given us like a bit of credit for the
Yeah.
choices that we made. For a bit of context, Skin Deep has been making print magazines like really guerrilla style. Like in terms of um none of us are I was going to say classically trained, but we're not classic. Like, we're self-taught most of the time, and I think bringing Amrit into this has been such a great uh relief as well because we've been the things that we've done before. We never, like you said, like it's just gut feeling. I think a lot of us have just been making choices, not willy-nilly, but making choices out of just because it felt right and because of the history that we've got and the lived experience that we had. And having you on board really made certain decisions like justified. And we're like, oh, we're not crazy. We're actually onto something and we've got good intuition. And it almost like you are almost coming in as this, like you're saying in the design note, almost as this, not a scientist, but like someone who comes in to an archaeologist, I would say. No, is that a correct way to
Yeah.
sort of call it like a design typography archaeologist? And you really delve into it, like the reason why, how fonts have changed, how they've morphed into things, and yeah, how was that process for you in terms of making having that hat on, but also making as a creative?
Um, it's honestly the best job in the world because what we're talking about is excavation, and having an excavation site is it's not conventional graphic design. I think like contemporary graphic design of our time is make pretty pictures, make this thing look good. It's content, it has to go out there. You often hear in like agency work, like we want, like you're on a phone call for a brief and like, yeah, ideally we would have had this yesterday, and you're sort of getting briefed on a project, and everything is so like fast paced that when we're talking about okay, cycles, rhythm, timings, pace of a project, it was nice to kind of, the early conversations. I think about the conversations at like King's Cross and when I first came to the Shoreditch office, things are we're talking about how we create something different. Um, and different wasn't about speed for us. It was about like respect, consideration. Um, and it was a sense when I was coming in, my interpretation was like, yeah, it's about care. It's about like Skin Deep has an audience, been going for 10 years. That's a huge feat within itself. Like the idea of a DIY publication surviving essentially like 14 years of austerity and being a young person in London, being able to do all those things. And also just reading the publication. So like
Mm,
being given all the back issues and yeah, like I guess what I could see was a lot of decisions were being made through both the consideration of the Skin Deep team, but I could see like this is why the Adobe software being used to facilitate this idea is kind of limiting because it's like as people who are self-trained and self-taught, the computer's not always it can be really good in terms of that liberation that we can just get information out there. But in terms of that feeling of warmth and of comfort, um, that's how you will sort of talk really eloquently about the project. And I felt as if when I was coming in, the role was to it was exciting because it very rarely felt, especially in the first sort of like early months, that I was doing design work. It was more of like just listening to quite lovely ideas. And I think then when it comes to translating that stuff into design work, it's not as if I have a huge reference or a mood board to go
mm,
and be like, well, copy this, this, and this. It's more
mm,
about, oh, I remember when we had that conversation, or
mm.
it might have been something I thought about on the tube on the way home. Like, there was quite a nice feeling that I guess really what I'm trying to talk about is like my job was to, yeah, capture this sort of spirit. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Um, I want to go straight into the nitty-gritty. Yeah, I want you to show us like maybe like pick two title pages
cool,
that you're very, very proud of.
cool. So when we started, it's felt quite funny actually because even before we started with titles, I was just so excited making title pages. So Georgie had like sort of rustled together some like copy, being like, "This is not going to be the title page. This is not going to be the name of it." But it was nice to just sort of share and bounce those ideas. I think maybe because it's the first piece, um, something really like emotionally charged for me about the Harleston Renaissance one, where I was simultaneously excited because I hadn't heard of the film Baby Mother, and the more I was reading about it, and it was the kind of thing that like lots of exciting thing. Not only is it an exciting film, but lots of exciting literature had been written about it as well. Um, and I just like those two words together, like not really knowing this place beforehand, and then sort of researching it. And I think everything I was sort of doing um, was like good, but it wasn't great. It was just okay. Um, but and what I'll sort of talk about a lot is that I just spend a lot of my life in archive and just trawling through bits of information that feel redundant, but I'm amazed that people have kept. And one thing I found was this sort of party had happened in Harlesden and just thought, I'm trying to the clothes and the architecture and the fashion and the kind of general feeling of the film was really hard to for me to try and symbolize through a gradient or like trying to manipulate the sequence on a dress or something. And I saw it and it just really spoke to me in a way of here's something that essentially wasn't created on a computer, so great, love it, but also is made in a sort of cheaply way that you can have like, I don't know, like 8 or 9 typefaces on it, but it feels really fun. And it doesn't adhere to like a semiotic logic that you would like learn at art school. This is sort of just straight up DIY. Um, so I was just using this, and I was like, this is a relic of Harlesden that I think, in a way, you're having a conversation with the past a little bit. You're saying, I recognize you as a cultural, um, perhaps ephemeral piece of information, piece of design. Um, and perhaps this is like a way of nodding to that and a way of sort of building from that. So in classic Amrit fashion, I found all the exact typefaces that were used, and then thought, okay, how do I maybe not like bootleg it, like totally rip it off? Maybe how do I nod to it? But it just didn't. Um, again, it was sort of it was okay, but I just felt as if I wasn't sort of satisfying a scratch, and then when going back to the team, it was quite clear that this poster was just good enough. It was like really lovely. And it's still sort of a remix or a sample, whatever you'd call it. But yeah, there was just something nice about it. And I think trying to cram too much information, it almost just felt a bit forced. And I think when it comes to that breathability, sometimes it's sort of creating something, and then once you've made this sort of artifact, then sticking it on the page, as opposed to thinking of I have to fill this entire rectangle. In a way, graphic design is just a series of how do I fill this rectangle? So that was a nice approach to it. Maybe my favorite title page was Sophia's piece. Just loved it. Like I'd had the privilege of going to the Institute of Race Relations archive, which amazingly was just like a 5-10 minute walk from the Skin Deep office. And just spent like like a good like half a day there looking through a lot of things that they just had on site, and I didn't really have the like I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. I just sort of went in with an open mind, and something that was quite nice was maybe again a series of rectangles, people holding up letters on different placards, different banners. And it's quite nice in our time. There is definitely a warm feeling of seeing how handmade and like people actually spending the time to make these things. Whereas now you might sort of see I don't know, you might see the same stand up to racism sort of placard thing for the last sort of 15 years, which doesn't look very interesting. Um, but this stuff's always great. I think it speaks to a different epoch of typography and just a different way of mobilizing. And I think that was kind of it. It wasn't thinking about, oh, this letter form's great because the C goes into the A like that. It was thinking about what a lovely time where through atrocities and horrible moments in British history that people were just they didn't give it a second thought. They just knew that mobilization was important. They knew that grieving together was important. And these are values that like, that we're trying to amplify basically. So when it came to this, I really loved the way you couldn't always quite see the text of the banner. Something nice about we're moving through time, we're moving through this thing. So what I'm doing is I'm creating these again, sort of, I'm not creating something to fit on like an A5 sheet of paper. I'm trying to build these, well, building blocks really. I'm trying to make the tools themselves. And there's this one nice scan that we took, and Sophia's piece was called "The People We Were Writing For." So I sort of found an appropriate font that I'd seen a couple of times in the archive and seen referenced a few times, um, and just started trying to like collage with it and try to sort of make it look somewhat as if it was on the banner. But also at the exact same time, I'm not working in a linear way. I'm working on multiple ideas at once. I the guy who set up or kind of led the Institute of Race Relations for a while had written this pamphlet, and it was it was the same size that Skin Deep had always been, and it was only £1. It was really accessible, and I loved the I don't know, there's something again about his time where, okay, maybe this is at a time where it's not been hand drawn, it's using a font to look hand drawn because it's actually more easy and efficient to kind of get that out there. So I use that font to then try and build Sophia's piece and like, okay, we're not going to copy it exactly, but we are going to take it as if it was a book or if it was published. And then what does that mean? It gives a different nuance to it. But then you start to lay these things out and you start to write, maybe it's not the font. I guess the funny thing here is people have handwriting and then somebody's drawn a font based off handwriting. And then I tried to do the other thing where I just quite literally wrote the word writing there and I thought it was quite nice to put in. But writing is a big part of this. Mark making is a big part of using your brain about somebody with authorship, not somebody just typing at a computer all day. So I start to draw the font based on handwriting in sort of bubble handwriting, as it were.
Mm.
Um, it looks good, looks okay, and you see handwriting throughout, like in various parts of the magazine, particularly at the back, which is what I've sort of put in here. Um, but it's that layout for me that was kind of that's where it got really interesting. There was a bit of maybe it felt quite artistic to start to like build things from scratch. Well, not from scratch, but build things from historical context, from going
Mm.
to not just archives, but speaking to people, speaking to the secretary. Um, and then yeah, you just kind of end up with something like this, which is really nice. So the kind of final piece does just look like that. I don't think I
Yeah,
actually put the
I've
slide
got
in the
it.
end. Have you got
Um,
it?
oh wait, I don't have the slide,
Oh yeah.
but
So
I've got
like
it.
it
Yeah.
just sort of looks like that. The idea that it's been overprinted, um, and yeah, it's hard. In a way, I don't want to like over explain it because
No, of
it felt
course.
right. It felt right in the sense of we weren't having the authors' names on a piece. Um,
Mm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, there's something quite proud, I'd say, about that feeling of it. Um, so yeah, I think those two title pages, I've put some more towards the end as well, which I could potentially talk about later.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, yeah, I think there's something about the way you work is so like bouncing around, ping pong around, back and forth. And I guess like as a team as well, there's a lot of conversations that happen. So I feel like maybe every time we like added an idea, you would exponentially add like 10 more ideas onto one thought. And that is something that is amazing. But also in terms of timeline, it kind of put us into a corner, especially when we're trying to figure out the cover.
mm,
So I want to talk about the cover because I really want people to see like how much work and how many drafts you've put into it, and unfortunately because it was there's so much intentionality that in the end like the cover is to be honest when we've always been doing Skin Deep, cover is always the last one. I don't know why, but maybe like, and I know that you've got a slide somewhere that says like cover is the last or whatever. Like there's a quote that you're gonna share, and I want you to like, yeah, I just want you to be like, this is what the process and etc. And like also like going through the inter chapters as well, because the inter chapters really also kind of inspire the cover in itself. But yeah, talk us through your many iterations of the cover, which we've landed on this in the end.
cool. So the yeah, it's all to be honest, it's still a bit of a blur with the cover. It was what I've done for this presentation is I've, with the exception to a few title pages, every image that is in here, maybe like 90% of images, sorry, that are in here, are taken from like group chats, emails, because that's the real thing. That's how things are being viewed in real time. There's actually very like Sylvia said, like it is like ping pong. Everything's going back and forth. I believe that the process will always be inherently messy. The kind of job of the designer and the job of the team is to package it nicely to kind of make something at the end so the audience receives it. I don't believe in a polished sort of process. It leads to sort of a stale thought process, I think. So I'm working quite a lot in this cafe in Manchester at the time, which here is at Christmas, and I'm also working in my little room in Reading, which I'm here now, and I don't have a bookshelf, all the books are sort of just on the floor, and it feels very temporary. It's basically I'm making Skin Deep is the biggest project I've ever worked on in my life. But it's also the first time in my professional practice I don't have a studio space. So it's interesting that I'm trying to carve out like the place I can get a hot chocolate with oat milk, or the place I'm coming to study typography formally, and trying to make these things like my home, but also my literal studio, and like to create these like cultural outputs. Um, Meeting one, meeting two, meeting three, Sylvia's just like, we always do the cover last. Like, get done, covered last. And I always kept on thinking about this amazing magazine. And this cover was designed by a Dutch studio called Mavis and Van Deursden, who no longer worked, like they no longer sort of like have a practice, but had been running for about 25 years, maybe a bit longer. But I'm a type guy. So when I was thinking of cover ideas, I was thinking of like, okay, this is a time capsule. This is like we're encasing all these letters, and it reminded me a lot of this experimental Jet Set book cover on the left of like, is there a way that could be diagrammatic or literal to kind of say we're encasing 10 years um of publishing. Um I think Sylvia, this is one of your drawings that maybe you'd started like scanning through. There's like various points in the project as well because I don't have a space that I'm just going to art shops and just buying ink and brushes. So I'm just like I'm always trying to make this idea of like mark making and let's just see what happens and comes up with. Really
Wow.
fortunate to hire a freelancer called D. Dion really helped for a couple of days with the Skin Deep team, where I created a lot of elements, but I needed somebody to sort of fudge some of these things together. And I don't think D had done maybe about half of these, and maybe I'd done another half, and Tess had done a couple maybe. So the Skin Deep team was myself, Rory Clifford, and Tess Sweeney, and we also hired D, a freelance, amazing illustrator and designer based in Manchester for a couple of days too. Um, and this is where it gets blurry for me because it it's sort of happening in the background where you're sort of doing lots of things that are covers, but the cover it felt like a totally different project. Like it felt like really the project for Skin Deep was like like 170 pages or whatever.
Mm.
And then this thing
It's different.
you
Yeah.
you could almost just be like, it'll get done. It's fine because it's the cover and it is being worked on. And I think some of the things at the bottom here are like, I'm a type guy. I'll type it out. I'll figure it out. And then what I haven't done here is I've not shown every possible version of the cover because everyone concerned would just go insane. But when I'm sat in that, I think when I sort of roughly counted, there's definitely over like 150 versions of like a cover, and there's one day in that cafe in Manchester where I make 70 in a day. Um, and I think it probably wasn't the most effective way to work for sure. Um, but also, and I've kind of got screenshots of other illustrations and other bits because
Mm.
my brain's going between the job of like the inside is very technical, it's very precise with its typesetting. If we found a double space or if somebody's name's been changed or we're making like very last minute edits, the shift is it's quite a lot really.
Mm-mm.
Um,
It's
but
tough. Yeah. Sorry.
what I did enjoy though was like the thing that grounded me between those things was the title pages. So every title page, I think when I was brought onto the project, um, we were considering it like a poster, really, like a piece of artwork that could live not only within the magazine, but something that could have been essentially not like we want anybody to do this, but like to rip it out and like stick it on your wall to be like, what a great fucking thing.
Yeah.
So
It,
that was kind of useful. Sorry, Sylvia, you go.
no, sorry. I just to give context of title pages. So the title pages are these for the first page of each piece. For example, Jeju, where it's a design that takes up a whole page, and we started doing that in our issue on called movements. And the idea behind it was that, again, like Amrit said, the idea behind it was that each title page or page typography page is can be can serve as a poster in itself, as a statement. And it was a way for us to balance um, editorial and design. And because a lot of the work that we do at Skin Deep is is design in service of editorial, but editorial also in service of design. It's a constant conversation. Not one prevails above the other. And I think, especially in editorial spaces, there's a lot of emphasis and time that has been put in for editorial, and then design is always not often, not always, but often like the last thing that you think about. And it's just such a shame when we work at Skin Deep, when we do print, we're like, there's so much work putting into editorial, and it's such a shame that it is not accompanied or is not packaged, as you say, Amrit, within something that's equally as beautiful and thought through. So yeah, that's something I just wanted to quickly let people know, because we call it title page, but hopefully, yeah, with a bit of
Yeah.
context, people will know that what that is. But yeah, keep going very quickly, and then we're gonna go into something
Cool.
else.
I think with the title pages, there were also this amazing thing of interchapters throughout the project. So there was something quite transferable where on the right, that's just kind of how we initially laid them out, just as like a temporary thing to be like, we had contributors and people who were important to Skindeep's history contribute sort of this like sort of message to the future, or message kind of, how would you sort of articulate it, Sylvia? Maybe like they'd
Oh, it's like
arrived in the
a
future.
no, it's like a time capsule. You know, like when you were kids and you put a little time capsule thing in and then you bury it, and then you hope that in the future someone from the future will discover it and then open it and like have a message from the past.
Yeah. And there was something nice about like you open this page and it had to feel different. And this is kind of where the cover and the title pages, but also the interchapters all have this sort of common thread of like what makes this different to like a typeset or photography essay on a page. So we're looking at sort of gradients, and I'm showing people like in on the team like Mira Joyce's work and Koichi Sato's work. And as a result, I'm making gradients and I'm kind of making these things that essentially I want to feel like, weirdly, I think maybe I was thinking about like how does the future look, but also how did people in the past think about the future, or what
Mm.
does the time and pace between those things look like? Um, and that's kind of that's how we ended up with that. But in a way, a
Mm.
lot of the cover iterations do feel like um there's a family resemblance to what the time capsule, to what the interchapters were. And I think those are the sort of main gradients that
Oh,
we drew that are in the
gorgeous.
magazine for them, which are, you know, they are like sunsets in a way. They are like these,
Mm.
it's imagining really other worlds and other portals and other spaces.
Yeah. There was a moment where I was telling you, I was like, Amrit, I want to see, I'm into chapters. Like the first one is the sun's rising, and then like in an ideal world, you like open up and you can see like the sun up and then
Yeah.
down, and then yeah. So there's this
Oh
I
yeah, I didn't include that, but Tess did a really good job of that actually.
um
Um, but yeah, there's this basically like the interchapters then start to inform what the cover could be like. Like that for me, that was the cover that got away.
yeah, you were
Um,
very adamant about that. I
I
think you
understand that we
loved
couldn't
it.
have like a black cover, but I was just like, this is the one that bangs for me. But yeah, like
Yeah.
I'm also just like four hot chocolates deep, trying to like sell that idea. Um, so yeah, I
Nice.
think
Nice. Yeah,
covers.
there's a lot of conversations around the covers. We went through a lot, and I think it's tough because you always feel like you've got this eureka moment at the end when you finish the whole inside, and then you're like, okay, cool, I know what the cover's like.
Yeah.
And we were waiting for that. Um, but
My,
anyway, oh
I
sorry.
think in hindsight, what the reverse engineering of this would be to go into a magazine shop with printed out versions of the cover and imagine how an audience member, how a reader of the publication or a potential reader would first encounter it. I think that
Mm,
was a trick that I had missed because we were sort of thinking, I think really we all had too much of an emotional attachment to it. In a
mm.
the kind of user testing would have been good to go to a magazine shop and just been like, ask like which one would you gravitate towards, or like for ourselves to have that
Mm.
in the context of other things, which is
Yeah.
easier said than done for sure. But
I mean,
that's, I feel like, what I've learned.
yeah, I think there's also like readers, but I think what my capacity within the print was as like, like a historical, like institutional knowledge, where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, the anthology is its own special project, but it also sits within all the past previous issues. So there's like
Yeah.
thinking about it within the sort of systems that like the history of Skin Deep as a as an organization and but also like anthology in itself. So it's like constantly going zooming in and out, in and out, in and out, and it kind of really fucks with your mind a little bit because you're just like, I don't know what I like anymore at the end of the day because
Yeah.
you've gone through so many iterations. But we did it, and we've got this cover which I really really love, and the orange is such a skin deep uh like thing, like the skin deep orange. So we thought about the first cover. Yes. So these all these like I'm trying to figure out like on WhatsApp and just like drawing on it. But yeah, scroll through it, have everyone have a look, have a peek. Um
That
and
was those were
yeah.
some of Tessa's ideas, which were really I loved how messy because they're just sketches, but I really loved how they just were sketches. There was something quite
Mm.
nice about that.
I was
Um,
really, really attached to the Skin Deep logo because because we used a Google version, which we hate, we should be hating. And then can you tell us about this specific one? It looks like the previous, like all of our previous ones,
yeah,
but yours, the one that you chose
let
was the
me
the OG
maybe I
printed.
took it out actually. Oh,
Uh,
sorry. I've not
it's okay.
organized these slides. Oh yeah, right. So basically, like the font here is actually the font that is used for the Skin Deep um logo for the past few issues, which I thought was great, but there was something just slightly missing from the way that it existed previously. It was just drawn slightly different for a screen. And I guess this is what it's that relationship between the way the ink hits the paper, the way you set type on a computer. So what I was doing was, and this is actually, I'm basically using the fonts that existed previously within Skindeep, but I'm manipulating them as if they've been overprinted and bled. So I think there was a really lovely bit of feedback once actually, which was a turning point for the project. Sorry, I want to scroll through all this. Yeah, like here. I think somebody points out like, well, why is the S and the K sort of touching? Why does the D and the E sort of bleed in together? When I'm going through archives and I'm looking at the way that a DIY publication would be done, it was that sort of sense of urgency of that's just is called bleeding on like the way the ink would literally bleed out. And sometimes what I really like is fonts weren't if we look at the 20th century, the fonts that are used for print aren't necessarily designed for print, particularly for DIY radical publication. It's about really just getting a message out there. And I felt maybe this is slightly mentioned in my design note that like you couldn't tell Skin Deep was DIY because of how polished it was. And
Mm,
that's a compliment to Sylvia's design work, but it's also a compliment to like or a testament to when you grow, it happens with TV shows a lot. Like if you watch the TV show, like if you watch like the first few seasons of a TV show you really like, looks shit, like it's all like the grain's really horrible, it's a low budget, and then they get loads of money, and then the show might be as funny, but it might just look too clean, and now it's like 60 frames per second for some reason. And I think that lo-fi nature was something I was trying to bring to the project. And
mm,
I think when you see um it wasn't about like it looking the most beautiful it could possibly. It was really about you I think first and foremost, it was about reading the pieces themselves, understanding the message and being like, how do people respond to things? And I think for me it was like visual literacy where um, people basically in our time maybe aren't as interested in maybe I've gone past it actually. Something that really stands out in our time is like how distrusting we are of like things that look like
mm,
like this sort of corporate Memphis flat design. That this isn't bad work. this is appropriate for what it is. But we all know it's a bit, you're not getting, like, if you see this, you kind of know that you're not going to get a raise, and you know you're just going to get given pizza on a Friday. There's like, this is like exploitation 101 graphics. In our visual literacy, this reeks of gentrification. This reeks of like some Ponzi scheme, B2B marketing. And it's the kind of thing that I'm weary of. And I'm weary that basically, if you're using software like Illustrator or something,
Mm,
those tools lend themselves to creating this polished thing. But equally,
mm.
we all grew up in this time of like, do you remember when everything just looked like this for some reason? Like,
R.I.P.
that's a total, like, that in a way actually reminds me a bit of the cover of just like, look at this like static view of the world. Like, everything is just that. How is that the most recognized image for like a decade?
Love that.
Has nothing to do with computers, but also has everything to do with
I think I've got
computers.
that at the back as well. Yeah. I'm trying to emulate that.
Yeah.
These are, I think, one of the great things of bringing you in on this project is that you have all this knowledge that, to be honest, I just don't. And for me, it was such a enlightening. We had so many enlightening conversations, right? Like even the team was just in awe, being like, Amrit, tell us more, tell us more. And I think that's why we really wanted to do this. And I would really love for you like to talk through, like what you were saying, like the history of design and like things that didn't end up in the print, but also, like archiving as practice. You use like the font that you shared with us earlier. Just anything that, yeah, just talk us through the history. Like not in depth, but like what I want to know is like things that sort of inspired you outside of the anthology, references that you've got in there. Well, these are great. Yeah,
Cool.
just talk us through all your slides. Not all of them,
I
but
think,
yeah.
yeah, there's no real rhyme or reason to it. I think that it is just gut feeling. Like, for me, somebody who's always lived in the same place my entire life, and I've just sort of moved down to Reading, and then I was going into London sort of every month for the meetings. I was so wide-eyed and just so like happy. Like, I think people in London are like, "Oh, I'm not traveling there. It's 30 minutes away," or like, "I'm not crossing." Like, I'm not going south. I'm not crossing the water. Whereas I was just like, I'm gonna go everywhere. Like, everywhere's so big. And I was just like quite I believe the London term might be gassed. I was quite excited to be cutting about the big smoke. And what London has is just loads of galleries and loads of really good points for design. An artist I really like in London, is called Stephen Willett. He's maybe in his 90s now. There's a lot of these sort of diagrammatic sort of looking things, and a lot of these things he was making in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Um, and as well, like, it's not, I think I was just when I say like there was no rhyme or reason, I mean I was just looking at things all the time,
Mm,
and I think because the scope of the project was so big, I didn't at any point, particularly in the sort of first half of it, want to narrow myself to be like, oh well, it's print, so we should only be looking at print things. Like,
mm,
actually, quite a lot of the time we're talking about like takeaway packaging, or we're talking about title credits, and um, you guys would sort of maybe speak about, oh, do you remember when this magazine had that and it came with this? And we're talking about things that aren't even like, after a sort of series of tangents, like so far removed from the idea of a magazine. But then
mm,
what's quite nice is you sleep on it, you go to the gym or whatever, and then those things are like, oh, actually that makes a connection to that. And I kind of show this sort of Stephen Willett's piece of a neural network of, that's really how I think a successful project works. If it was like a lineage, it'd be so dull to go from A to B in a straight line. Everything that we're looking at, I wouldn't just say it was me. I was encouraged to watch films. I was encouraged to kind of like listen to podcasts, like had book recommendations. I think maybe like
mm.
one of the first times we even met, like it was slightly um not absurd, but it was like, it was lovely to give you all a book basically
Yeah,
based
that
on
was
what I
cute.
thought would be quite nice, because in a way I'm at Reading. the central like the main library on campus has 1 million books in it, which is just like unfathomable to me. And I have access to all these things, and I think basically, and maybe if you've not understood from now for like, anybody in the audience, like I'm just excited like how widely available knowledge is. Um,
Mm.
it's like you could I could honestly just live in archives and just be like, isn't it amazing, like how humans have done all these great things? And maybe it's a bit of a, we're talking like, a lot of Skin Deep has to look at quite difficult things, lots of like horrible things that like people experience. A lot of it to do with like prejudice or kind of displacement and things that like are uneasy to talk about. But what's quite nice to kind of respond to, well, like an important part of responding to that is doing it justice and thinking about, well, not only is there like a plethora of a visual history that precedes us, but we're building on that and we're
Mm.
respecting that. And I felt like when we were looking at references, it wasn't necessarily like let's just look at like the good guys. Let's look at
Yeah.
like other cool DIY projects. It's about spinning things, and I think that's kind of that's sort of a thing with visual culture where mood boards will kind of show you this is the thing that will make the story look hot. This would be like this would look amazing as a scan or as a photograph. You see it on Arena or on Pinterest or on Instagram, and it would look incredible. But I feel
Are
like
we having the debate of the mood board now?
I think let's leave that for the end. I think yeah,
Yeah.
I was that was a cheap shot by me. Blindsided you. But something I kind of briefly mentioned in the design note was using Carl Gerstner's shell, the font that he drew for Rejected Pitch for them. And it was just quite like, this knowledge had been around for maybe like 30, 40 years and then got published in this big sort of £200 Carl Gerstner book, which like, I have access to for the library now, amazingly. And then what's quite nice is so if we look at the Shell logo at the top, these kind of drawings of them, when I first bring Dion as an illustrator, um, I'm doing this whole shtick to D like, isn't the world great? Isn't visual culture amazing? I'm being very gesticular with my hands. And then D comes back and interprets it just in this amazing way. And we
Oh my God,
like
I just saw the shell now. Sorry. It's giving. Can you see a duck or can you see? Okay, I'm gonna let you.
I love that. I love yeah. But yeah, it was just really nice. But also uh I wanted like that sort of double blow. So I didn't just want the shell to be incorporated in like a way that maybe the like uh co-founder of the magazine might not even see straight away. But like I also wanted the font that was used at the bottom. So that shell rounded font, like if you look at the rounded kind of like edges that like Gerstner had drawn for the logo. Um, that's also included in the font. So then a guy called Lawrence Brunner draws this font that he sees just in an archive on a shelf, and then just manipulate that. So that is the font, but it's kind of
Mm.
and it's to me, it's like it's not. It's just important work, I think. And it's what I appreciate is it's not important to everybody. There's different ways that you can approach a graphic design project. But
I know.
the
I
important for me
yeah.
is that sort of
Sorry.
conversation with the past. Sorry, you go, Sil.
No, sorry. I think it's so important because I do feel it's hard work what you do, and it's work that a lot of people want to do. I think, it's like this. It's due diligence, but due diligence on design and graphics that I feel like as a generation today or as a society today, we've really taken like visual um anything like imagery for granted because we're so overly stimulated.
Yeah.
So no one wants to do the due diligence. I mean I'm guilty for that. of like not doing I'm like, oh, that's pretty. I feel it. I think it's good. You know, I feel the vibe. It's vibing, and the fact that there is so much thought behind it is it's also like a sign of respect to what graphic design and typography can do. And I feel like people use it. It's almost like people like mistreat it. You know, they're like, you're pretty enough, so it's okay. I don't need to treat you right. Whereas for
Yeah.
you, it's like you're pretty, but I want to treat you right.
I
And
will just edit out that clip. Just email that all. All my ex-wives out there. But yeah, I think what kind of talking about in a way is like post-colonial study and like
Mm,
decolonizing things as well, where okay, if I well maybe not me, but if somebody wears like a bindi to like a music festival in 2014, maybe that's cool, maybe that's hot. Maybe in 2017, that's just not okay. Maybe that's like considered like a big faux pas. And it's kind of the timing and the context of those things that's really important. Where now we're talking about, and this is kind of the birth of Skin Deep is like, okay, other worlds are possible. Like
mm,
discrimination is not good. How do we treat things with like the kind of respect that things deserve. And like histories are complicated and they're nuanced, and people have different opinions about them. My point is that like I don't have the answers, but I'm going to sort of go diving. Like I at one point I had a slide near the beginning here of TK Maxx, I think.
we love
Which
tea.
yeah,
Thanks.
I do love TK Maxx, and I think what I feel like what we're talking about is a bit like TK Maxx because TK Maxx is so rubbish, is so horrible as an experience. But if you're a true excavator, if you're a DJ, if you're a true selector, you'll just dig. You'll have like the treasure trove. It's
It's
there. The
there.
answer you're
Yeah.
looking for is there, but you have to put in the work, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And like to give respect to graphic design is like you're saying it's due diligence, but that can be like boring work. That
Mm,
isn't is really it's not just boring, but it's the speed in which graphic design takes place. So the
mhm,
privilege I had was Skin Deep carved out space to organize trips to archives and to kind of actually pay respect to be like, well, this piece by Misha's not only great, but it deserves like true visual culture
mhm,
to kind of support it, but to live side by side with it. And I think when it comes to how we talk about maybe where food comes from or how we talk about how things haven't aged well, maybe from like 20 or 30 years ago, if not sooner or before that. People are talking there's lots of things that I think haven't hit graphic design,
mm,
which speaks volumes about how like um uncaring graphic design can be and how
mm.
uninterested it is. It almost feels like this is quite a far thing to say, like maybe it's not appropriate, but like there's almost a bit of like silence being complicity within graphic
Yeah.
design. Like if you're not doing that work, if you're not doing the
Mm,
research and just thinking you can get away with like um, using imagery that maybe isn't appropriate for an
yeah.
event or something.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it's sort of cherry picking those cultures which can benefit you in a favor and you can profit from.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about maybe somebody who drew a typeface or commissioning an illustrator for a piece.
Mm, yeah. Wow. Okay. On that note, we hold it because this is such a good segue into the next section. But we are due for a 5 minute break, right, Hannah? Five? I know we've gone over a little bit time-wise.
No, you're very good. 2 minutes is very impressive. 2 minutes over.
Okay.
Very good. Yeah,
Okay.
little 5 minute, go get some hydration, stretch your legs, all of that. Yeah, let's come back at 1:17 to do the last bit. And yeah, keep any questions percolating because at about 22, quarter two, we'll stop and like make sure we've got some room for questions. Um, so yeah, and feel free to drop in the chat as you go if you want. Thanks everyone. See you in a bit. Hi everyone. 5 minutes goes by fast, but when you're ready to start trickling in, let's slowly get back into it. Shall we crack on? Get the screen share back up?
No, I was going to go
Cool.
straight in because I really just wanted to, because we were talking about something that was really interesting, especially like today, and that is something I wanted to segue into, especially with your example and my I have a deep anger of how big corporations have co-opted like like really beautiful typography or design and in service of branding, in service of, uh furthering their own agenda that is extremely extractive. And I think I kind of want to hear about your thoughts about today's world, design in today's world. And I know in your designer you say we're in a golden age of typography. Um, is it because of the abundance of typography or is it because of the way it's been utilized?
I'm thinking of a very almost like niche part of type design where what excites me about typography as a skill set is there are like quite a lot of interesting young people studying type design whose first language isn't English.
Mm,
Um, so if we look at the research that like maybe somewhere like Microsoft or Google is doing, okay, huge corporations, but within those teams are little weirdos who are doing all this research about how reading works, about how you prioritize non-Latin scripts. And that's important accessibility work. So I think although we live in a golden age of like, okay, here is like some 25-year-old who would like reviving this old script from like these islands where only 15 people speak it, and they're documenting it and they're finding future-proof ways to keep it alive. What I don't mean is that that is mainstream. I mean, that is like what I see in my type world, which is maybe like a small pocket of yeah, people who are interested in typography in general. Um, and I'm fortunate to have sort of access to that through education, and
mm,
I feel like a lot of my role is to kind of make as many people as aware as that it's like people are doing good work, and
mm,
it's very easy for those people to fall into a job that is by a big conglomerate or corporation who essentially have the kind of cash to keep those people doing typography and type design work. Um, I guess like it's not easy to think of a route where the arts and culture sector could support somebody who was interested in this kind of work. That's
mm.
sort of my personal experience of it
Interesting.
because yeah, like a big essentially it's who has money for the time that goes into this work. And I'm talking about the research side. I do the research side of the work. I'm not somebody who draws these letters themselves, but if you were to draw a character set, you're not drawing 26 letters, you're drawing the letters with the accents and something that we encountered on this project was what happens when a name in a story or an author's name is we don't have the diacritic to support it in a Latin font. Like you then have to go out and buy the appropriate font, but also you have to do it so it doesn't look totally othering. And I think
Mm,
that idea is yeah, not singling somebody out because their name isn't spelt with Latin letters
mm,
is really important to me.
mm. Do you have an example on your deck about people who are doing it right?
Um,
Oh,
I
no.
don't. I think what I no, I think when in the to be fair, what I do have is in the what do you call it? The design note, I do talk about Lawrence Brunner, and I think of what I could do is I could always put together some resources and stuff, and we could share it on the Skin
Yeah.
Deep like Instagram story or something of like here are young like people of color working on what you can also do is like you can look at type foundries, I would say. So
Hmm.
like on Instagram there's source type, so SOURCE type, and then maybe you put a link to that in the chat or something. And these are people who do not only publish typefaces but do like write about type as
Mm.
well. So they're kind of showing you like here's where this thing comes from. And I think everyone is kind of excited and interested when they do learn. Like on the Skin Deep team, everyone was interested when I kind of explained, like, oh, that font was drawn for this reason. You know, it's kind of things start to make sense. You know, you
Yeah.
see a font like Times New Roman, and then you find out it was because the Times newspaper of London commissioned it, and then worlds start to get a bit smaller. And in the way that when you learn about language, and if people speak maybe multiple languages, like if you learn something like Italian or Spanish or French, like and you start to see the similarities between those things. Like, oh, I can guess what that word is. I can make an inference because that sounds like another word that we have. And I think the
Mm.
more you learn about type design is it's quite nice because it's such a niche, weird thing. But there are projects like Women in Type, led by Alice and Fiona Ross. And yeah, it's a good point. I didn't really put any of that stuff in here, but I'm happy to kind of share
Yeah,
those resources.
that's so good. I think what just you saying, just what you're saying just now, I think a lot of us, including me, have really taken type for granted and
Yeah.
like fonts. Like we don't, there is such little discourse behind it, and yet uh it's such a big vehicle with the work that we're doing within the arts and culture that we're almost like it's a shame that there isn't much um studies or like accessibility, like reading accessibility, like
Yeah,
readings are accessible, like readily accessible for us. Like it's always been the fact that it's so niche shouldn't be niche in itself because it's so apparent, it's everywhere, right? Like logos are everywhere.
yeah.
Texts are everywhere. When we do poster for like a night out, you use type, and I don't know, it's just this thing where like and like I was saying, like we're overly stimulated by images and typography and I guess like you when you talked about Futura, and for me Futura is like my reference point of Futura is Wes Anderson. He uses Futura on all his films. So it's just like unless you really delve into it, you kind of don't really question it. And I want to know about your thoughts about logos, pop culture, and how like that, you know, it would do like what I guess for me it's like the origins of a type like has most of them been co-opted or they been made for certain brands like like how do they go about it? Like what's the history behind it?
It's a really good question. I think if we stay on like Futura for a second, like Nike will use Futura condensed extra bolds for its like just do it. And if you see like a campaign in and around London, it's really likely to use that font. For a logo itself, you would call a logo that has a font in it, you'd call that a logo type. So that would be not a font you could buy, but custom drawn letters. So um like you couldn't buy the Coca-Cola font, you would just have those letters drawn in
Oh
it.
wow,
And
okay.
most companies, most big brands will have that. You would hire somebody who comes from like a lettering tradition. But we do that now on screens. But
Mm,
that was not the way that logo, like if you think of a logo from like 100 years ago, it might look more like a stamp
mm,
because that's like the sign of authenticity. And it might not just be one name, it might be like it's embarrassing, but it might be like Keel's Pharmacy, New York. And Kiehl's is kind of like one of the only brands that still tries to like hark to this like old like time
mm,
period,
mm,
and uses like lots of wordy language and boring kind of pharmaceutical kind of looking things to show significance in a way.
Yeah.
I think with pop culture though, I don't know, everything just sort of, not to sound like an old man, but things are starting to look the same and a
Mm-hmm.
bit homogenized. In not, I think because it's, for me, it's somebody who makes images every day looking at a computer. I know how easy, or know how so many things that you can make are not really intuitive to process, which I think is integral because everything we've talked about is a process and a conversation, but is more just about like, okay, this software has this function and it makes everything look like Chrome type or makes everything look shiny. And it's almost the equivalent of like showing like tin foil or like jingling some keys to like a child. Like it's not, it's just so unsophisticated. But I get why it has like this instantaneous like attraction. I think the reality of a lot of, I think David Rudnick's really good at articulating a lot of the things that I struggle to articulate, and he makes this really excellent point around, um, clients pay a designer for the work, but in a sense, clients think they're the like it's for them, but it's not. It's for an audience, and I think
Mm.
designers often get caught up with this idea of ego and being like, well, it should be about how is this going to look on my portfolio website? This is about my
Yeah.
Instagram. This is about my own cultural capital and clout. Whereas I think when I'm making work, I'm thinking about who receives this information. How did they receive it? So popular culture feels a bit always like a sign of the times and a good kind of metric of like how individualistic are we, how collectivized are we, how mobilized are
Mm.
we, how do we communicate? Um, and I think I'm of the opinion that like civic society is like it's not what it used to be, but it's like it's not like it's sort of collapsing in real time that you can live in a flat and not know who your neighbor is. People aren't like I was reading a history book the other day, and the historian talks about he's going like as a child in Scotland, um, he could cycle around for like miles and go to a different town and sort of knock on the door and ask for a glass of lemonade, and he would just sort of be given it. Like
Mm.
it scares me a bit that we don't live in that time that strangers interact or you could have trust in somebody like that. Particularly in Britain, like it feels very hostile.
Mm.
People are sort of untrusting of one another, and visual culture almost seems to have that.
Reflected that.
Yeah, like everyone sort of, there's a bit of like a 50 minutes of fame. Like maybe really what I'm talking about is like I could typeset any company's name. Like, it's like if somebody was working on like a musician was like, I'm making an album and I took
Mm.
like if I made like an interesting lettering project for them, they would kind of like it because it's their name. Opposed like,
Mm.
oh, that's my name and it's in lights. Whereas actually I'm thinking more about that shouldn't be the end goal. The end goal should be like, why would a user, not a user, but like, why would somebody who's like a potential fan or listener, like, how do you reach that person? Is it more about location? Is it more about like conversation? Or is it more about just putting on gigs as opposed to like this thing being graphic design? My 2 cents there is like quite often we don't need graphic design for graphic, like you can't graphic design your way out of like unethical work or projects. That's kind of visual literacy there, where
Mm.
my parents aren't as visual, like all of our parents aren't as visual,
Yeah.
don't have the same visual literacy. The kind of way I explain it to students is when you're illegally or watching a film online, or if you're going to stream a TV show online, you know which like button to press to get there. It's kind of it's not the big green button that's download now. It's
Yes.
kind of this more you almost have a feeling when you hover over it because
Mm.
of the kind of sensitivity of a trackpad of what's a
Mm.
button and what's not a button. And that all ties into this feeling of how you receive text and image.
Mm.
There's also this idea now, and we'll all be a bit older and maybe fortunate to kind of not know this, but younger people don't really know what album artwork is because it's such a tiny thumbnail. They're not receiving it at a
In the
size, and it
same
almost
way. Yeah.
no. And I think this is kind of where like billboard space is maybe more important than these things, or how do you co-opt public space that is so intertwined by like quite mediocre design work? There's always a feeling, and this isn't to sound like an old man, but like there is a feeling when you look at adverts from a bygone era that they were better. And
Mm.
I would always encourage people to be like, well, it's like we have more knowledge that we can still make things look like that now. But what's the reason? And there's a myriad of reasons there. Um, yeah,
Do you think it's because it's so accessible, it's become diluted? I don't know. I'm just thinking, I'm just trying to figure out like I don't want us to fall into like almost like like not elitism, but like in a way of like graphic. Like back then, there was more time, more less people were doing it. It's more intentional. I would say roughly like in a
yeah,
crass way, and like nowadays because it's everyone's got an iPhone, everyone can edit, everyone has access to Pinterest. It comes into the mood board conversation that we're gonna have now,
yeah.
where like is it like I get where you're coming from, and I do think people need to sort of today we do need to do a due diligence of whenever we're making image that there is time that what we're making needs to feel like there's intentionality, there's impact and there's longevity to it rather than it being like, oh, it's a campaign of like 2 weeks and then next thing is like, oh, we'll have a Black Lives Matter, like or Black History Month. And then it's like, oh no, well, Black History Month is done. We'll do it's it's like Pride Month. It's like, but then what is it? Like what you can't, it feels like I don't know. I'm like thinking like, oh, it feels like you're eating the cake and you're having the cake at the same time. Like, what is the solution? And not a solution, but like, how do you go about it? Like, accessibility ultimately is going to be, take like
What yeah.
adapted from the masses. Yeah. Sorry.
What I would say is like something can just bang, like something can just have the inherent quality of just looking amazing, and it doesn't have to have the level of thought and research gone into it. Something can just look amazing, it can just look sick. And I think I will always give credit to that of saying there's multiple ways of do like in no way do I think like I feel like myself, I'm constantly learning new ways that I can create these things,
Mhm.
but it's more about I think to answer your question, Sylvia, it's probably around communication and
Right.
education. So the education would be like how graphic design education in this country is just awful. It's just like it's not very good. Somebody who was a lecturer for like 7 years, I think even before students enter the university, it says something about the university system as well. But like if yeah, I guess what is graphic design to maybe like an 18-year-old is like they've seen a pair of like Air Max 97s on Instagram and it's an illustration of them and it's hashtag illustration, hashtag graphic design. And they're like, oh, I like that. I'm gonna go to uni and do that. But graphic design is like a service, it's like work for another person, it's service work. It's not necessarily artistic expression. Like I have the fortune of like carving out this niche to be like it can be both, but it can also be led by not just me, but a client, and I can bring people on and I can pay people to like if I like for me, as somebody who kind of runs the studio, I'm mostly freelance, but Taxi Cab Industries is somewhere where I can bring people on. Be like, well, I'm going to pay you today to sort of read books. Like, I can go through mood boards, I can look at images, but let's get to your interpretation. I want to hire you for your brain, and that's the fortune I have because I'm young and I don't have a mortgage and I don't rent a car. I don't have any like actual responsibilities in my life. That's something I can afford to do at the moment. But it's the idea that I want young people to think it's a confidence that maybe you don't get from like that I was never brought up with my education or my environment that I've sort of just observed that a lot of the people who are at the top doing graphic design are making really bad work,
Mm.
but can position themselves in a way that it kind of feels important and really this idea of like making something with intention and beauty. Um, I think when I say communication, like when it comes from communication, I think that's like it's what Skin Deep does. It's like it's having dinners, it's having conversations, it's like it's going on a walk. And I'm of the school of thought that like I don't have good ideas sat down. I come to my
Yeah.
computer to sort of to make work,
Mm.
but if I'm playing like Seven Aside or something, that's like engagement with the world. My fear is that like people are quite chronically online. So there's something about education, but there's also the education has to be about like the bad parts of graphic design. Like when I was
Hmm.
at school, when I was at university, um, I was told like there's no ethical way of doing graphic design. It's like it's
Okay.
all morally um shameful. It's like you're never going to be a good person as a graphic designer, which I just like did not believe in the slightest.
Mm.
And I think if you're paying for your nose for education, I feel like what I'm trying to do is like to kind of inspire young people to be like, you are allowed to do this, you're allowed to lead on this. So to make visual culture interesting, like I think you need young people. You can't have like 50-year-old creative directors who are on like silly money. Um, it's the same with lots of things. It's like well, I want there to be like young filmmakers and young
Mm.
musicians, and I feel like what I want to do is like support just like people whose maybe voices haven't been realized in a way that um like they're too anxious or they're too scared or
Yeah.
something. And I think graphic design is this amazing tool to like or this amazing thing that you can kind of like harness to get things out
Mm.
there. But you're saying, is it diluted because everyone has access to it? Yeah, for sure. Like you can't make any money from music now for the same reason. Everyone
Mm.
is a graphic designer. That's not a problem. That's kind of probably what left-wing politics was like. That's a good thing. It's liberated. Like if
Yeah.
you've, you know, if there's like an atrocity that's happened, you could make up an Instagram post in like 5 minutes and get that
Yeah.
information out there and
I love
amplify it.
that. Yeah.
That's really important for our time. It's not that you have to go
Yeah.
to a typesetters and you have to pay somebody. The tools, the mechanisms of production have actually been liberated. They're totally free.
Mm.
But what you
Yeah.
don't have with that is how to use them effectively, or how do you think of them as like important signifiers, not important signifiers, but like important instruments in their own right, and
Mm.
that what you're doing has an impact on the world. What I would probably say is that we live in a time where most people don't think about their impact on the world at all.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, that was, yeah, you're right. I think also like I kept thinking like the issue is not on the graphics designers or the creative directors who call themselves creative directors and have absolutely nothing to like sort of support that, and they've just been there because they have a vision.
Yeah.
That's my experience in like the commercial realm. However, we are up for Q&As, and I hope that everyone has sort of written up or have any, dying slash not dying, that's a bad word, a burning question to ask Amrit. Um, Hannah, is there a way of like, has anyone sent in any private questions, or does anyone want to just take the mic or raise their hands and like
Yeah, there's nothing in the chat. It would be also nice if people feel like it to switch on mics, switch on videos. Feel free to, yeah, like put your you can do the hand gesture
hand?
and jump in. Yeah, it'd be nice to like have some in-person chat. We'll leave
I
a couple.
can start this off. Yeah, I have a question from a friend in this garden. The question is, if you're helping someone without any design background, how can you build their brand identity, including logo, fonts, etc.? What are the key questions you would ask when beginning this process? Any advice or common pitfalls to avoid? Thank you.
Um, so I'm is the question is like is this a question that like they would like they are doing a brand and they want that information, or is it like how would they engage with a graphic designer? Sorry, Nina, to like throw. for a span.
They say how you would engage with the graphic designer. Yes.
Okay. I think just that like vulnerability is fine. I think just being really honest, like I have no idea what I'm doing. The talk's called Entirely Unsure. I think it's really honest to be like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need some advice, I need some help. People are genuinely quite lovely. My advice would be like you just go for coffee or like today's like a lovely day. And you would just talk about your like what something would look like at this stage, but like what's your reason to bring this thing out? I think the ideas are kind of easy. Finding out like the root of like why something ought to exist is exciting. And I think that's where if you're making something that is contextual and is respectful and out of a place of love, you want to know like why is this person going to start this project? Like, how can I get involved? Like, is it not just like as a graphic designer, the stake shouldn't just be, oh, I'm the guy who does the logo or I do the posters. Like, you should probably also be the person like, like pouring drinks or like cleaning up at the end of the night. I like the idea that there's sort of skin in the game, as it were. Um, so maybe it's the idea that the person who wants to start something, maybe it's like finding a therapist. Like it's more about finding somebody you trust and some like trying to, maybe it's not going to work out the first time. Maybe it's about if you're going to be that honest and vulnerable with somebody and you're looking for like a good relationship there. I feel like Fraser Crane like offering like a psychotherapist like sort of advice on the radio. It's great. I hope that answers the question. If not, I can try and articulate it later.
Got a thumbs up. They say yes.
Thumbs up, amazing,
Thank
love it.
I think Noor has written a question on the chat. Hello, this talk has been epic. Smiley face. I want to ask about how going from always having a studio space to have temporary workspaces has impacted your process.
Uh, that's a really good question. It has quite literally broken my brain. It is insane because what I'll talk about is a class difference between the price of rent in Manchester and the price of rent down south. So just I'm a student at the moment, so I'm fortunate to kind of have the university where I can work. It's not like a studio per se, but I can go in and work from my laptop there and have there's a printer I can pay to use. Um, I think my the studio is useful, but it's not the be all or end all. So when I was in Manchester and had a studio, had it for about 7 years, but I wasn't necessarily in every day. I would I would use it, but like I used to be in every day. Then the pandemic happened. So actually maybe about 4 or 5 years of having a studio, my working habits drastically changed because of the pandemic. So it's it's a useful place, but also like I wasn't like if I was going to do a painting, for example, I wouldn't want to do that in the studio. I feel like painting was more something I'd like to do like at home. And sometimes I'd go to the studio and not like I might send like 30 emails or something, or some days like I might just end up it was a shared studio space with 10 other people. So you might just sort of you might just turned up, done a bit of work. Like you might not have had work necessarily to do that day. But it was quite far away from where I lived, so it wasn't the ideal circumstance. I think is I could probably have the rest of my life not having a studio, to be honest, and just working in cafes. But equally having a space can be important for particular projects. I think carving something out is fine, but also being really adaptable. Like I used to have like an iMac on my desk, but to be honest, it's been in a box since March 2020. I've just worked on a laptop since. I just never got it back out from the pandemic. So I was like, well, actually, I can just work from look where Nina is. Like look how serene that looks. That's like isn't that way nicer than being inside all day? Um and again, it's maybe it speaks to when I had a studio, I might just like go on a walk or something, and then that might be where the idea takes place, or I might have a client meeting, and I found it good to just be on my feet a lot. So in the way that I'm quite good at going on tangents is I try and talk about design. I think my design process is quite fun for me to like bounce around the city. So if I have like I might be in the studio, there were no 2 days that look the same in the studio for me, but I might be in at like 9 or 10, and then send something off the print. I'm out there for lunch. I go get lunch with a friend. I'm like kind of looking at posters, and then I'm sort of like placing them up in the city centre, being like, oh, how would this look? And trying to scale that. And then I might work from a, like just like from a pub or something. It was it basically, sorry, like it's a long-winded answer, but for me, there's no point having a studio space if it was going to feel like a 9 to 5 job. That was the one thing I was trying to avoid. So it's often just a space where I kept my stuff. Maybe I probably outgrew it at some point and maybe kept onto it a bit longer than I needed to have it. So being here is better because I actually prefer being in libraries and archives and talking to people. But like maybe later down the line, I find that I need a studio space again.
Nice. Well, there's loads of questions. Amrit, you're gonna have to whisk through it without telling us your whole life
Cool.
story. Sorry.
All good. It all started when I was
Um,
5.
so the next question is from Baile. Is that correct? How I'm pronouncing your name?
That Bailey.
Bailey or by listen, I'm giving a little Brazilian spin. Like Baile Funk. Favorite design you've done that never got used? Oof, the one that got away.
Uh, that's do you know what, Bailey? Like I think about it regularly that I could publish a whole book of rejected work because my entire practice is just rejected work. I think I'm quite good at making work. I'm quite slow at making work. I'll always caveat that. I'm not the fastest person in the world, but my ability to sell ideas, like amazing what I think are good typographic projects to like people who literally couldn't give a fuck about it is I almost need to bring somebody in to actually sell ideas or to study the phenomena how bad I am at managing a business. Um, what's the one that got away? Um, it happens too much. I think every project I work on is most projects I work on are quite compromised and I get a bit sulky. It would be too traumatic to pick out one, and it would be such a diss to any clients who would watch. I'm conscious this is being recorded.
No, it's fine.
Um,
Just do you want to choose one from your spread here? So you've got a few, or no,
oh yeah,
it's too heartbreaking for you to even include in yours.
the cover that I wanted for Skin Deep was
That dog one, wasn't it?
oh my God, there's so many. Oh my God, look at all the covers. It's all coming back to me. TK Maxx.
Mm-mm.
It'll be here somewhere. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, Bailey. I'll have a think about it. Actually, wait. There's more questions. If there's time at the end, I'll get
Yes.
back to you.
Okay, great. Next question is from Aisha. Have loved this sharing. Thank you. Would love to hear more about design to print to paper to binding. Oh God. And that journey with Anthology. Amrit
All
loves
right,
conversations about
Sylvia, cut me
binding.
off after 2 minutes.
Okay.
Cut me off. So print paper's just the best. Paper's so good. Maybe it's like watching the US Office a billion times, but I'm just obsessed with like how lovely paper is. If you're gonna fucking cut down a tree, like you give it all the service that it deserves. Don't print bad text on it. Don't print bad typesetting on it. Um, it's an ecological decision for sure. Inks, like the way something's printed, it's good to have good relationships with printers. Most printers are grumpy old men. Amazing for me. Those are my people. We speak the same language. But it can be quite intimidating for a lot of people, for sure. I'm always happy to kind of like, um, yeah, sometimes it's just like it's a tough relationship, but the more you work with a printer, the more you develop it. It's never necessarily going to be like great from day one, but hopefully if you're a printer who like cares about an art project, then great. I think that was the answer to the question. Cool.
Yeah. Oh, to talk about printers, something that Fiskin do, I'm going to be very quick because I've got 1 minute left, is we went we went with the printer called TJ Books first, and they went into administration, and our anthology almost didn't get printed, and it didn't get printed on time. And it was a very difficult decision for us within the core team to kind of swallow the price because they basically just took our money and gave it to the creditors, whatever. But that's a piece of anecdote that we really thought it was important for us to share. Um, and then so we went with our previous printers and it finally got made. But just to let you know that everything that there's a lot that happened behind the scenes and we're very, very happy that we've got this. But it's as Amrit said, you need to have good relationship with your printers. If you
Yeah.
don't know them,
The lesson
this is
learned
what happens.
there was we were like, oh, right, these guys are well cheaper than everybody else. We'll use them. That's not a good sign of assurance. You can also read a book which talks about the whole history of printing, and you can't predict that a printer that hires 134 people is going to go to an administration the week that they're meant to send off your things. It's an unheard of situation. But we move. Um,
Okay, so we've got okay. This next question is from Jana. Hi Amrit and Skin Deep Babes. Second, at the above, with this conversation with so inspired lightning, I wondered what your advice would be for someone who has an interest in graphic design and typography, but was never classically trained and is interested in deepening their knowledge and understanding of the processes and history around it. Where is the best place to start, essentially?
uh, I would say books. I would say you don't need to be like classically trained. Like I didn't go to a particularly good university to study graphic design, but what I thought was fortunate to have is like really good relationships with my tutors, particularly the ones who maybe only work like 1 day a week. Um, I had the privilege that I like drank. So drinking for me helped because that's where graphic designers in Manchester in like 2015 hung out at like exhibition openings and stuff. You don't necessarily have to drink, but I felt as if yeah, I wouldn't actually encourage that advice. It's not what I want to say, but it's just sort of acknowledge a privilege there, I think, for me. I was the guy at uni who just literally went to the library like in the evenings and weekends. I really enjoyed it. I didn't necessarily read every book, particularly not from cover to cover, but having books around me was very inspiring. Because you really what my point there would be, Jana, would be the knowledge and the processes and the histories just come from a genuine curiosity of like, how can I do this thing? Um, Particularly like for me, somebody who's always grown up in like quite a white environment and has only ever been the only person of color in a room, let alone have a kind of be like in their 20s running a studio in Manchester. The things you're coming up against, the obstacles are like insurmountable. So for me, it was useful and validating to have the knowledge that everybody didn't have, which is unfair because I should have been given advantage, like I should have had been on an equal playing field, but that wasn't the case. But my ability to articulate things about design just came with more readings, but also like just challenging things. So actually calling things out, which is always really scary, but kind of having those conversations. So if you find other people who they might be graphic designers, they might just be people who are interested in things, whatever thing somebody's interested in, there'll be graphic design around that. It could be football, you could your niche could be like the knitting of a scarf the knitting of type on a football scarf is similar to like how 1980s arcade games were had all pixel type and stuff like that.
Mm.
I like I think we live in a good time where like more accessible books are coming out. So this is quite a good one, which I think was published. Um, for me, the lack of like black graphic designers is like hugely concerning. I feel like after Black Lives Matter, everyone and their dog was like, right, we fucked up, but we're going to start hiring black people. I've just not seen that at all, really.
Yeah.
That was kind of like maybe they hire a couple of South Asian people or they hire a woman, but like I'm not seeing that on the scale that I was led to believe going to happen about 5 years ago. And I think reading a lot of books, or skimming a lot of books, I don't fucking read, nobody reads
Mm.
books, but like just having them and talking about them is a good place to
Nice.
start, I think.
Um,
I go to magazine shops as well. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you off there. We will be
Cool,
bringing
cool.
everything. We'll have a whole, we'll email out or we'll be putting together like resources, a package of resources afterwards so that Amrit, you can share your sort of references and
Cool.
advice and stuff. Last two questions, going to be really going through it. Lauren Joyce, hi, Amrit, love that part in your note where you mentioned to design often and always. Question the iterative process plus how you know what a final design is. What's some useful advice for someone for knowing when to pause, land on one of the many iterations you work on?
You don't know, you never know.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah.
I knew when I read it, I was
Welcome
like,
to
Amrit's
art
going to say
school,
you don't know.
buddy. What the reality is that there are so many other contextual factors, which is a deadline and several missed calls when your friend's on Do Not Disturb, because you're like, oh, I can make it better, I can make it better. But yeah, it's better to be finished than perfect. And for me, often and always isn't something I necessarily do. It's something I aspire to do. The privilege of being a lecturer is do as I say, not do as I do. Again, the privilege of being welcome to the patriarchy is great. No, I think what's nice is it's for me, it's like that meme of like two people sat on a bus where like one of them is like having in despair and one of them's having like a good time, and it's the same thing. For me, it's that like the work is never finished. Like there is no mountaintop. You just the point is to climb. Um, you're not there to reach the summit because the summit doesn't exist. The point is to kind of that iterative process. That's where I'm not looking for happiness necessarily. Perfect, yeah. It's the contentment of like of doing and making. So when I land on a piece of work, I can often be the harshest critic of like, oh, if I had more time, but it's just going to spiral into like negative the thought patterns and stuff. So yeah,
Wow. Okay. That bars after bars after bars. We're gonna have to do loads of reels and
it's
quotes on
fitting.
that. The last question from Johnny. Thanks for the fascinating and open presentation. You say that the best ideas come when away from your desk. When graphic design is a service job and not a hobby, how do you avoid feeling like your job is taking over your free time?
When graphic design is a service job and not a hobby, it's tough. For most people, graphic design is a hobby, like straight off the bat. Uh, I make very little money doing what I do. Like it's not no like I'm not in archives being like, oh, this is how I'm gonna make my fortune. I do it as an act of service, which is maybe sounds quite cringy, but my core belief system is that belief system is to kind of help other human beings. That's what the word design means. Design means to help service other people to make their lives easier. Um, how do you avoid feeling like your job is taking over your free time? I don't. If I knew, I would tell you, Johnny. It is all intertwined. Like, I'm gonna head out for a walk after this. I might go to London, and I'm just gonna be looking at signs all day, and I'm gonna be like thinking about, oh, how beautiful is that letter form? Like, I wonder why that happens to brick or to stone when you carve that. I might send me on like a spiral. I might end up in a library trying to get some information down. But that's just fortunately for me, that's what I enjoy doing. And I have to, it's not very good to compare yourself to people, but I have the enormous privilege that most of my friends don't enjoy their job. I have an enormous privilege that I enjoy what I do. Um, and because I've had my own studio and because I started with no expectation, with it just being an experiment, I've just managed to make up doing these things on my time in a way that's like um I can still carve out free time for myself, but when I'm at work, it's like my mind's at play. So it's yeah.
Nice.
But the
Very nice.
short answer is like Just don't worry about it. It's fine.
And that is how we end this
Yeah.
conversation. Thank you so much, Amrit, and thanks everyone. Wow, that was I learned so much. And this is the thing about Amrit, is like I feel like 2 hours is not enough.
No,
It's
no,
never
no, you're
enough.
way wrong there. This is
No, that's so
you're
true.
all getting compensated, you're all getting refunds.
Yeah, we could go on and on and on and on for hours on end, because there's so much to talk about. And I because of the fact that like this is us trying to hydrate Amrit because Amrit doesn't really drink that much, and I think you've only drank once on camera
This is like
here, which
straight
was
up
the big.
gaslighting. This is fake news.
But yeah, like we could have gone on and on. And I thank you everyone for staying. I know we ran over 2 minutes past. Hannah, is there anything you want to wrap up the combo with?
No, you've done it. Thank you. Just thanks all for being here with us. It's been such, like a proper interesting conversation. I've loved it. So thank you both so much for taking the time to expand into it like that. It was brilliant. We'll send over some resources. Yeah, follow up with any like links that Amrit wants to share. Yeah, thanks to the Skin Deep team, thanks to Nina, and just yeah, keep an eye out. We've got some more satellite events coming up in different forms over the coming weeks and months. So
Yeah,
I'll just pop a link to our website in the chat, which most have probably
yeah.
have a lovely,
It's
lovely
all gonna be
afternoon.
yeah, thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Hannah, for all the tech
Thanks,
stuff
Hannah.
and thank you, Amrit. Have a great weekend, guys,
Pleasure.
and enjoy the sun. Bye.
Bye.